We come now to the concept of libertarianism, which is, to state the completely obvious, the other side of the determinism argument. And so this is now exploring the concepts of free will. What does free will mean? What are the options within free will position? The syllabus lays this out in the same sections that it used when we were looking at determinism. Now, don't forget this section here. This is the sort of non-religious bit of this exploration. And so as we look at libertarianism, so a free will position, we're dividing it up according to the syllabus in terms of philosophical. So we've got Jean-Paul Sartre, man is not free to be free, and the waiter illustration. So philosophical, in other words, Sartre here is just simply sitting. He's not in his study because he's Sartre, so he's sitting smoking his French cigarettes and drinking coffee in a French cafe. But he's the most important thing here is not doing empirical science. He's sitting and thinking. Then we've got what's called the scientific, another French, don't know how to pronounce her name, Angela Sirigu, and she's a neuroscientist of some sort, and so she's looking at research evidence that the brain allows for free will. So we'll look at that scientific bit in terms of she's just looking down a microscope at a brain. Well, that's your symbol for that. And then the third category is the psychological. For the moment, let's just ignore the fact that there's plenty of psychology which would come into the category of scientific. But what this isn't scientific as in looking down a microscope at the brain. The psychological approach is the empirical element of it is observing human behavior, which is possibly not quite so clear-cut as looking down a microscope at the brain. And for the psychological, we're going to look at Carl Rogers and his humanist approach at self-actualisation. As we look then at libertarianism, a huge element around it is about definition. What precisely is meant by it? And the precisely bit is incredibly important. Yes, we've all got an existential sense of free will. Okay, so what does that mean? Now, a libertarian position, a free will position, does this mean simply that we are rejecting a fully physically determined universe, including humans? In other words, we're saying that this existential sense of free will contains at least some element of genuine free choice. We're confronted by a choice and we could genuinely have chosen otherwise, no matter how trivial that choice might be, but there's a genuine little bit of freedom somewhere. So do we mean that? Or are we making a statement that humans are completely free to act? Now, it's possible to hold a 100% determinist position. Strict materialists hold this position. Now, if you've got that position that every single element, every tiny little bit of the universe, the current state of it is entirely determined by the state of the universe a nanosecond before, and theoretically, if we had all that information in place and we knew it all, theoretically we could predict the next step. Now, if that's that's 100% determinist position, that is a position which is tenable, it can be held, and some people do that. The strict materialists would hold that, and clearly, if you're holding that position, there is absolutely no space whatsoever for free will in the universe. Every action is determined entirely by the preceding state of the universe, and therefore any sense of free will we may have is purely an illusion. It doesn't take much reflection on empirical evidence to quickly identify that a 100% libertarian position is clearly just nonsense. And so the one I keep coming back to, you know, I'm retiring at the end of this academic year, and so I tell you guys I'm going to go for a new career with the NBA. And you know, you're going to pour scorn on that suggestion. Last time I did it was a genuine one with a class of year 9s, and you know, it was the ones we've gone over before. Too old, too white. The white bit's probably irrelevant. But in other words, what they were doing was saying, look, the simple physicality of the universe mean that you will just simply not make it in the NBA. And that's about genetics. It's about the year I was born, a whole stack of stuff. And so really the discussion then is about, well, how much genuine freedom does a person have to choose? And from this, don't forget, we're looking at this within ethics. And so an absolutely central element is how much personal responsibility does a person have in terms of the way they behave. Now, very importantly, any position at all which accepts some element, no matter how small, some element of genuine free choice in a person's decisions, that is then, we've looked at the diagram in terms of that watershed line, you are in that case on the free will side of the line. You've taken a step away from that determinism, that hard-nosed materialist position, or the theological predestination where God has got absolutely everything mapped out. Now, the crucial thing there is with the free will, the libertarian position, what you've then got to do is argue precisely where and what this freedom consists in. So let's go back to our vehicular illustrations. And so going back to where we started with this, the bus and the tram. So there you go, you know, you've got the bus. A bus, far more ability to go places than a tram. A tram has no ability to go other than the tram lines, that predestination model. But here we go. So your bus has got, it's restricted. You can't take a bus off road. It's not going to do very well, but it can go some places. And then you've got this military vehicle here. These things can't fly, but as I understand it, they can go pretty well anywhere else on the surface of the earth, land, on water. And I think if I've read it and understood it correctly, they can even do underwater to a certain extent as well. And then if we go to this one, Supercar, 1960s TV program with puppets, which I used to watch. And Supercar, flown by Mike Mercury or driven by Mike Mercury, piloted. I can go literally anywhere at all. This thing can fly, it's got wheels, it goes along the road, it can go as a boat on the water surface, it can go under the water, it can go absolutely anywhere at all. This is Sartre territory, and of course, very importantly, Supercar is fiction. It does not exist in reality. Let's look then at our syllabus categories and start with the philosophical. So don't forget, in the terms of the categories, we've got philosophical, scientific and psychological. The philosophical are those people who are essentially working with thought experiments. They are not on empirical evidence. They are sitting in their studies and thinking. Well, not Jean-Paul Sartre, because he's French, so he's sitting smoking. He's got to be smoking as he does his thinking. Now, Jean-Paul Sartre simply asserts that man is free. Now, really what he's doing here is just stating an axiom. He's not bothered with evidence. He asserts it. He's an existentialist, so that's really the way they work. And Sartre here has got very little, if any, interest in constraints on our choices. Choice is the absolute root of Sartre's ideas. Living our freedom, creating ourselves as we choose. And here's a standard, very well-known Sartre philosophical joke to illustrate that. Now, so the waiter comes up. Would you like un café, Monsieur Sartre? Oui, sans crème, s'il vous plaît. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any crème. in that case, I will have it without milk. I'll let you just think for a second about what that is about. Why does Sartre, he's going to get a black coffee, so what's the big deal? Why is it that he's got to have it without milk because they don't have any cream? Well, if we go back to what the essence of Sartre is, about choice. If you've not got any choice, if you're not choosing, you've got no freedom, you don't exist. It's that it is you exercising your freedom that is absolutely central to Sartre's thinking. Okay, Sartre then, a 20th century philosopher, French existentialist. He wrote fiction. A lot of his work you get through his novels, his plays. He wrote screenplays, short stories, and some philosophical writing as well. Spent lots of time sitting in French cafes, smoking and drinking coffee, supposedly. And here's a quote that you need to be able to work with. Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. There's the idea here that we are this thrown into the world. We just find ourselves in whatever situation we find ourselves in, and we become. There's an element whereby we're not anything until we choose. We become ourselves. We become people by making choices, and responsibility is absolutely central to Sartre. There's an element where he does go slightly in the direction of saying it doesn't matter what you choose, just choose. It's choosing that is absolutely central in your existence. There's a YouTube link here, which I suggest you watch that. So let's have a longer Sartre quote then. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because, to begin with, he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus there is no human nature because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. Not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills. And as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap towards existence, man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. This is the first principle of existentialism. So really that's the essence of what Sartre is talking about. He doesn't really think we've got a human nature. Note the rigorous atheism here. And it's about choosing. We are what we choose to be. It is our will. We exercise our will. It's our imposition of our will on the world that leads us on into whoever we are making ourselves to be. So this is it's a purely philosophical approach, and it's one which, when taken on board, gives profound responsibility. Certainly when we're looking at that ethics, which is the framework within which we're studying this, then as far as Sartre is concerned, we are responsible because all we are is what we choose. And let's look at a concept which is quite a complex one in some ways, and this is the idea of bad faith, mauvaise foi. And there's a story that Sartre uses, an illustration where he talks about a waiter, and he's looking at this waiter who is a bit too, sort of waiter-esque. And so he's not just being a waiter. You meet characters like this, where this waiter's not just being a waiter. He is clearly a sort of emulating the image of what a waiter is supposed to be. You know, the illustrations I've got here are taken. These are you know, sort of photo library shots of a waiter. And so in other words, if you want to depict a waiter in your whatever it is, and you need a graphic depicting a waiter, you buy these and you can put them in. And of course, what they're doing is they're showing what a waiter's supposed to look like. You could say almost a caricature of a waiter. And so what Sartre is saying is you have this image in your mind of what a waiter is supposed to be. And then you simply emulate that image of a waiter. And so you're not being yourself here. You are taking on a role that has provided images for you of what you're supposed to be, and then you step into that role. So bad faith, I mean, this is, of course, if you think about it, what Sartre is interested in is you making your genuine good faith decisions. You make your own decisions about how you are going to behave. You don't simply copy someone else's idea. You know, if you're being a waiter, the idea here, Sartre will be, you're being a waiter, you decide how you are going to be a waiter. You don't act the part of a waiter that has been given to you. Okay, we'll stay in France now, and we're with this woman. I've really got no idea how to pronounce her name, Angela Sirigu, and very different to Sartre, because she's just a hard-nosed scientist. You know, the image of the looking down a microscope at dissected brains. I mean, they don't really. They tend to look. They use fMRI scans and far more sophisticated than that. But the image here, you know, is her looking down a microscope at a brain, radically different to where Sartre is coming from. There's the link there to the New Scientist article, where you've got this idea of the possible site of free will found in the brain. Now, I'm not going to read this lot to you. You can just pause the video and read it yourself. The essence of what Sirigu is doing here in this piece of work is what is needed to find a space where free will is able to operate. Now, Sirigu says at some point the parietal cortex wills what particular movement to make from a variety of potential options. Now, it's this bit wills here. This is the very important word. We're looking at the concept of free will. And what she's doing is, from a purely empirical, hard-nosed science approach, she's found, the best way of putting it is a space where free will is able to operate. And don't forget, if we're looking at this sort of hard-nosed science bit and contrasting Sirigu's position with those who are the strict materialist. Now, the strict materialist says that all there is in the universe is matter, and if you've got matter, you know, the reason the universe is as it is purely and simply because of the way that the material universe was a nanosecond before. You just do that a nanosecond at a time, all the way back to the Big Bang, and it is all very straightforward, step by step. The previous universe determines the way it then unfolds next. Now, you do that, and it is just simply the matter of your brain, the brain chemistry, down to the subatomic particles, which determines exactly what you do. And if you're there, there's no space for free will. Everything that you do is just simply a product of the chemistry in your brain, which goes down to the physics of your brain, which goes down to the material universe unfolding from the Big Bang. Now, if you want free will in that system, you need, for want of better terms, a gap. You need some sort of space between the pure physicality of the universe and the free will of the human agent who is making a genuine choice. And what Sirigu has done is she has identified aspects of brain chemistry where she says you've got something here which looks like a space in which free will can operate, and therefore you've not got that absolutely rigid A follows B. You've got a space, and so therefore it might be that you could have A, B or C, which I've just got my alphabet wrong there. You could have B, C or D following on from A. It doesn't have to go from A to B. There is a gap which you know, they probably don't really know what it is. The crucial thing is it's the gap, it's that space where free will can operate. Now, very importantly, when you're working with this in an essay, is to say you do not understand this. I don't understand it, and I'm going to take a guess even your biology teachers don't really understand this. This is absolute cutting edge, high level neuroscience, which is very, very high level. So don't pretend you understand it. Read the article and have a look at how you can use it in the essay. And the essence of it is that she has found a space within the material universe where there's the possibility that free will can operate. And so we move on then to the psychological. I'm saying just be careful with this, because as far as I'm concerned, psychology, a lot of psychology is science, but of course it's not quite such hard science as Sirigu, Rogers and the psychologists. They're not looking down microscopes at the patient's brains. They are looking at the whole person type approach in psychology. So Carl Rogers then, a 20th century psychologist, humanist approach, self-actualisation. And Rogers, an American psychologist, and he's the founder of this approach in psychology called humanistic or client-centered approach, and he's very a key player in coming up with different models. So he's founding father of psychotherapy research, and a central term then for Carl Rogers is self-actualisation, and there are parallels with Sartre here, because what Rogers is looking at here is the person taking control of their own lives, making their own decisions. Now, to state the completely obvious, an axiom within that is the idea of the possibility. In other words, if you're going to say that this is about the person taking control of their own lives, making their own decisions, then an axiom within that framework is that humans are actually have some free will. They're capable of making their own decisions. And what Rogers worked on was, it's the psychotherapist's role to facilitate this. So in your sessions with your psychotherapist, it's the psychotherapist's role to, through conversation, through giving you exercises, whatever it is he does with you, to enable you to make your own decisions, to get a grip on your own life, to exercise your free will, to exercise your will, make your decisions, get control, and move to this self-actualisation. Now, although there's clear similarities here between what Carl Rogers is saying and what Sartre is saying, Rogers' approach is scientific. It's the psychological scientific, because it's based on empirical evidence of his clinical practice. Now, you could say, well, Sartre's is also based on empiricism as well, because, you know, he came up with his philosophical ideas because he'd just lived, you know, he'd observed people. But essentially, the way we distinguish this, we say that Sartre is taking a philosophical approach. He's sitting there in his cafe on the Seine, smoking his Gaulois, drinking his coffee, and coming up with ideas. Rogers is in the lab. Rogers is there empirical evidence of his clinical practice. In other words, as he, he's got his lab book, he's making notes on his patients, very carefully monitoring them. And what he notices is that the methods that he used produced statistically significant numbers of people able to make the appropriate changes in their lives to sort themselves out. And so what you've got, although their results appear to be fairly similar, it's the method of getting there. Rogers is a hard-nosed lab book, keeping records and looking at statistical significance, and Sartre sits there and makes assertions. And so Rogers then considers the human to be this active, creative, experiencing person, and they can respond freely. So they look at their experiences, they can evaluate their experiences. With the help of the psychotherapist, they can modify their behavior, they can make decisions to say, I will break this particular unhelpful pattern in my life, I'm going to get a grip, I am going to decide that I will behave differently. And that's in contrast. The other psychological approach we looked at within determinism was the behaviorist approach of Pavlov. As far as Pavlov's concerned, we just simply we do what we are, use the word, programmed to do. So why do we make the decisions we do? Why do we behave as we do? It's simply because of that that conditioning. We're not making choices. We might think we're making choices. It's just an illusion. And Rogers says, no, that's not true. Humans are actually making real decisions and can change their own behavior. So looking at what we're doing here then, we've got there's our person making a decision. Okay, and there's one factor in the way which of those particular arrows they're going to go down, and one is genes. Just that very straightforward genetic, it's passed on from ancestors, chain of causation going back, ultimately back to the Big Bang, because it's about the brain. The brain is physical, and the matter of the brain, the genes are physical. But it's chemistry, it's physics, goes back to the Big Bang. So that's one factor feeding in to which of those arrows that person is going to go down. Another factor then is our conditioning, our environment. And so all the external influences on us shape us to act in a particular way. So that would be a sort of the Pavlovian. So at that stage, our diagram is that's the determinist model. And so that's either just the hard-nosed, it's all about the physicality. And then you can have the psychological approach, the Pavlov's, which says you've got another element to it, which looks as if it's a bit sort of ill-defined. It's the psychological, but it's just as conditioned, it's just as fixed as the physicality. Okay, so that's the determinist framework. Now, where we are at the moment is free will. So what we've now got is we've got to get this idea of our own decision to act. And so what we need to do is find, well, where's the space for this decision to act, this free will component? And you've got Sirigu then says it's this phrase, this free-floating DNA in the brain. I've got no idea what that means in any reality, and I'm going to take a guess that you haven't either. It's just a phrase you've got to be able to work with in an essay, and the essence of it is, here is the space in which we can say it's not just genes, it's not just the physicality, it's not just conditioning in our environment. There is this gap here into which we can say, yeah, there's a space there for genuine free will. And then we've got Carl Rogers, the self-actualisation. And Rogers is saying, look, as I observe these people, he may not want to pin it down too tightly, but he's saying that if you look at the way people respond, as you look at the clinical results, then you can see that people do have the capacity to make their own decisions to act. And then here's some videos, and I'll put these links into the video notes, so you can just click on the link and have a look at these.